Hey, welcome everybody. We got a couple of things to talk about now that I can stop fighting my computer. Good lord. Um, I'll tell you what, I logged on to my computer today. I got everything up and running, and then one of my USB ports just bugged out, and I couldn't get anything to work on it. It took me like a half an hour just to get that USB port back working. Um, I'm not. Shoot, what am I doing? I'm not particularly up to date with working myself with working around Windows 11, so I had to I had to do some googling to figure it out. But we got it figured out, and we're gonna start our stream now. We're gonna start off talking about the election. The election happened last week, which I didn't get to talk about when it happened because I got a hideous ear infection. 30 years old, I get an ear infection. I don't, whatever. But I couldn't hear anything out of my left ear. I was having trouble like standing up. It was bad. And it's still not right a week later, and I still can't hear right out of this ear. Like my voice sounds terrible since I have an earphone in my good ear, and the other ear I can barely hear out of. So it's been annoying. But regardless, I'm here now talking about the election. The White Knight has ridden in to cover the amazing shit that happened last week in the election. Okay, so start off by saying everybody, and by everybody I mean most analysts, most experts, except for a few people, agreed that the election was more than likely going to be terrible for Democrats this cycle. All indications were that momentum was shifting towards the Republican direction. I mean, polls were just going to the right in what's felt like record fashion right at the very end. But this red wave did not happen. Biden actually lost a record low number of seats in the House for like last many presidents in the modern era, or almost all presidents in the modern era have lost seats in the House of Representatives during their at the midterm election of their first term. It happened to Obama. It happened to Clinton. It happened to Trump. It happened to um, George Bush Senior. It didn't happen to George Bush Jr. George W. It didn't happen to W because 9/11 happened, and the entire country was sort of like rah rah get the terrorists. So that was it, special circumstances. But yeah, like just general rules are if you win the presidency and you win any kind of control during that presidential year, like Joe Biden did, you're going to lose seats in the House the next year. And the Democrats have lost some seats. This is true, but holy crap, it is not nearly as many as you would think given what we know about the election so far, or elections so far that have happened in the past. I mean, it just came out that the Democrats have held control of the Senate, which itself is pretty wild. There wasn't anything. There were very few people that thought that the Senate would stay in control of the by the Democrats, and it looks to be at this point that they'll probably pick up a seat. They'll probably have an actual majority instead of it being split 50-50 with Kamala Harris breaking the ties. That's wild. That hasn't happened in a long time either. But the House is cool, buddy. The House is still in play for the Democrats. That's wild. That is insane that is still a thing that we can say at this point in time. that the House is still in play for Democrats. I mean, you need 218 for a majority. The GOP's at 212, and right now there's 10 seats that are possibly up for grabs. All of these ones here on the right hand side. Sorry about that. Hold on. More technical difficulties. Good lord. Today is not my freaking day, man. What is... I can't get nothing. I can't get anything to work today. Like this is crap. But we're gonna get through it. We will get through it together. I suppose we'll just have to do it that way. Okay, so anyway, so there are 10 seats in play. Technically, there's 11 that are uncalled at the moment, but the Democrat in Alaska is absolutely cleaning house right now. Like Sarah Palin is getting wrecked, which is always funny. Like Sarah Palin is at 26.6%, and the Democrats at 47.3%. And 80% is reporting like it's not even close. It's not even remotely close. So Alaska's going to the Democrats. So for all intents and purposes, um, there we go. For all intents and purposes, only 10 seats are in play, and most of them are in California, which normally bodes well for Democrats. But the California has the stakes aren't quite as high in California as they are in the stakes aren't quite as high in California as they are in other red states for a lot of Democrats, because California is solidly Democrat. They're the most liberal state in the country, so it's not. It wasn't really like abortion wasn't really on the ballot in California, like unless a national abortion ban became possible, which it isn't in this election cycle because Biden is in office. So even if Republicans took control of both chambers of Congress, it wouldn't actually be an issue on the ballot in California, because Biden would just veto an abortion bill anyway. So there wasn't like this huge surging urge to get out for abortion, which drove a lot of the turnout for a lot of other states. And as a result, New York went Republican. It went further Republican. It's still democratically controlled, but it went further Republican in every district. Every single district in the state went further to the right than it was in the last election. And California is seeing similar trends in certain areas at the moment, but a lot of the districts that are left to count in California are fairly urban. I mean, they're right down here in Los Angeles urban sprawl, right around Fresno between San Francisco. Like these are areas that are easily won by Democrats. So the shift to the right for a lot of these districts has to be really aggressive for them to win. And it seems to be that these races in California are very close. You'll see here 54.4% for Mike Garcia, who's currently who's a Republican, who's currently leading, but only 72% reporting. That race is more than likely probably going to stay Republican, but there's still almost 30% of the ballots left to count, or left to report so far. All this mail-in voting coming in from California takes some time to count because election rules are different in every state. So other states already have their mail-in ballots counted by the time election day comes, but California don't count their shit until day of, and there's so many goddamn people in California that it takes like a week or more to count everything. So like this, but like This one here, 50.1% of the vote going to John Duarte for the Republican Party, but only 61% reporting. So, like, that very likely, as mail in ballots come in, which skew heavily towards Democrats in almost every state, very likely could flip Democrat. And if that's the case, then the Democrats have a chance at holding the House also. And if they do hold the House, good Lord, that is nuts. That's crazy, given the context of what has happened in modern history. So, I have to take a moment. Fortunately, I did not stream this, so I have no proof. You guys can choose to believe me or not. It's entirely up to you. But I have to pat myself on the back a little bit because I was a detractor in my personal circle to the Republicans winning in huge numbers for this election. I was really unsure if that was going to happen, and it's just simply the turnout numbers that were coming out for early in-person voting a couple of weeks before the actual election were absolutely nuts for a midterm. Like, the turnout was crazy high, setting records in all kinds of different places. Georgia set the all-time turnout record for early voting, like the all-time record, not just like early, or not setting the record for early voting for midterms, or not setting the record for the early voting for like midterms in recent cycles, but the all-time record. They beat the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, the largest turnout presidential race in the history of the United States. Georgia beat those numbers in this midterm. And several other states were doing the same thing. Now, the numbers weren't as extreme as Georgia's were, but turnout was absolutely stellar for this midterm election. And, you know, gerrymandering aside, where Republicans have a built-in legislative or built-in voting advantage, turnout, the majority of the population leans Democratic. There's lots of independents out there that don't claim to be Democratic but lean Democratic. So when you add the Democratic leaning independents and the actual Democratic Party members, when you add those together, it's easily 60% of the country. So 60% of the country leans towards the Democratic side at any time. So when the numbers of voters go up, just by the averages of who makes up the voting base in the United States, it's going to favor Democrats. And this is where I have to pat myself on the back a little bit, because I really didn't know what was going to happen. I had no good predictions, but my gut feeling was that it wasn't going to go nearly as well for Republicans as a lot of experts and a lot of people were saying it was going to go. Like, polling, the people that they were asking about what they thought was skewing heavily towards the Republicans right towards the end of the election. But it just that didn't match up with what was happening on the ground for me. It's like, when turnout is high, Democrats do better. When turnout is low, Democrats do worse. There's an inbuilt advantage that the Democrats must overcome because of gerrymandering has been so aggressive in lots of Republican states, that like you need almost like 54% of the popular vote to even have a chance of winning the Electoral College as a Democrat, because of the way the gerrymandered districts work. And the same thing is true for the congressional districts. And so the polls will try to account for this, but they'll try to estimate the turnout. And when they try to estimate the turnout, they'll do it based on the model of who has voted in the past. but there's a very solid block of people in the United States that vote every single election. So if you're bringing in new people to vote, you have to ask who those people are. And all of the information coming out of the early voting was like young people are turning out in record numbers, and young people are like 80% Democrat. So if your country is 60% Democratic leaning, your turnout goes up, it's going to favor Democrats. But then when you look at who was actually who in out of that 60%, out of the block of people that was going to vote, who was the people who were coming out new to the polls that weren't coming out before, and it ended up being young people who are like 80% Democrat anyway. So like, yeah, polling said that the Republicans should win, but like just looking at what was happening on the ground, it was like the Democrats are probably going to do better than a lot of people think they were. And there were a couple people saying the same thing that I thought, but all of the big name polling places missed the skew towards, or missed the polling by a comfortable margin, and they missed it all favoring the Republicans. Very few, if any, of the polls favored Democrats going into the election, and I wonder if we'll ever get to the point where polling, because it's been wrong in like the last 4 elections, it's been massively wrong. I wonder if we'll ever get to the point where polling can accurately predict what people are doing, because they're not accounting for the turnout that's happening. When turnout is low, Republicans win. When turnout is high, Democrats win. And you can't poll for turnout. It's not possible. Like, you can interview you can poll thousands of people on whether or not they're going to go to vote, but your list for who to call is already made up of probable voters, so you're going to get skewed results anyway. So it's just, I really don't know at this point if polls are going to be accurate. It seems that the best way to tell what's going to happen on election day is to look at the early voting numbers that come out. What's the raw numbers of people coming out to vote, and what are the age brackets of people coming out to vote? That's not particularly helpful. It's not particularly helpful leading up to the election. Like, it's just a couple of weeks before early voting starts. So, if you're in like March or August or something, you're not going to get like a clear picture using that metric. But polling has been so bad recently that like I don't even know if that's any better. So, I don't know. We'll see. But regardless, the House is still in play for Democrats, and that is nuts because it just doesn't happen anymore. It's wild. So let's get to how this happened. How did the Democrats somehow manage to hold on to to their power potentially? I mean, they have the Senate now. The Senate is already at 50 votes, or 50 representatives for the Democratic Party. Well, 48 for the Democratic Party, and then 2 independents. But the independents caucus with the Democrats, so it's basically 50 Democrats. And they're probably going to pick up one in Georgia. So how did that happen, and how is the House still in play? And I think the answer comes down to 3 things of varying importance. I think least important was probably student loan forgiveness. Just in the raw numbers of votes, it certainly got the young people out to vote, and without that block of people, the Democrats would have been wrecked. So, like, you can claim that you could also make an argument for this one being the most important, but I think it's the least important just for the raw number of votes that it drove out to the polls. It's a new thing. It's a new phenomenon having young people this energized to go out to vote. But when you throw them a bone in the form of student loan forgiveness, you're like, no, we understand you're going through some shit with student loan forgiveness. We're going to try to help you a little bit. Like, is it enough? No, student loan forgiveness does not go far enough the way it's done now. But it still is something. It's something that shows that you're trying to help out with this cataclysmic problem the United States has that is student loans. So that drove young people out. The other one is candidate quality on the Republican side. I think this is second most important because a lot of the candidates that were running in the Republican field were like Trump, like Trump sycophants. They just would never criticize the guy. They rode through the primary on Trump's energy. But if we learned anything from the 2020 election, is that Trump has more negative feelings in the general population than he does positive feelings. The positive feelings that Trump has from his constituents are aggressively positive. They are insanely positive. But it's only like 25% of the country that really, really likes Trump. And everybody else is either is like indifferent to the guy because he's to them he's like a mix of good and a mix of bad, or they hate him. They hate this guy. So if you have a bunch of candidates who are running and their entire tagline for how they made it through the primary was, I will suck Trump's nuts, essentially. I will bend over, I will get down on my knees and kiss this dude's ass because it's his energy that I'm riding into office or riding through the primary. That's going to turn a lot of people off because the seething hatred of Trump and the people who would just rather have somebody who isn't such a pain in the ass, that is more people than love him. So when you tie yourself to a deep minority of the country, you're going to lose. It's just the way it is. And Trump has become a toxic brand. And it's to the point where like almost every single Republican candidate for office that Trump had personally endorsed was like, I endorse so and so for office. They lost almost all of them. And there are some exceptions. J.D. Vance won in Ohio, where I am. But J.D. Vance is a mild Trump sycophant. He jumped on the bandwagon. He jumped on the Trump bandwagon for like political gains, which I do not appreciate in a candidate at all. But he does have some positions that don't line up with Trump. So like he could, while sucking that sweet Trump butt crack that got him through the primary, he could also say, no, I'm not here to serve Trump. Like, yes, I want his help getting through stuff, but I'm not here to serve him. And he had some things he could point to sort of like level out his appearance. And then on top of that, Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, has a fairly good record with the state as for like the way he handled COVID. Like, Ohio didn't do great, but DeWine was like, he didn't participate in the bullshit when it came to COVID. He was like, no, this is serious. We have to take it seriously. I'm not going to shut things down. I'm not going to go crazy, or not crazy, actually. I'm not going to do excessive restrictions. I don't think anything he did was even close to excessive, but that was his messaging, was I'm not going to do excessive restrictions on business, but like you people as a public need to take this shit seriously. And as a result of that, he has a fairly decent approval rating in Ohio, and he also bucked Trump aggressively when it came to COVID. So J.D. Vance gets to ride kind of both of those waves. He got to ride the Trump popularity through the primary, and then he got to ride on the back of DeWine through the general election to win. But almost all the other ones just fucking lost. It's catastrophically bad, the number of Trump appointees that lost during this election. And it shows that he's on the way down, especially given how well DeSantis did in Florida. I mean, if you look at the news, if you look at the conservative news media right now, they're all shifting towards DeSantis because Trump got absolutely wrecked. DeSantis endorsed a couple of candidates that weren't in Florida, and they basically all won. And he absolutely cleaned up in Florida. So like they're bouncing on Trump. The conservatives are bouncing on Trump hard. Um, so the third thing that, and what I think is the most important, is Roe v. Wade. Overturning Roe v. Wade absolutely supercharged the Democratic electorate to get out to vote, because it was like, oh shit, they did it. They actually took away a right that we thought was settled. We thought that Roe v. Wade was it was settled ground. It was solid, good legislation that did it a very, like, honestly, a pretty damn good job at like finding out where this arbitrary line is between when a pregnancy is considered, or when a fetus is considered a fetus, and when a fetus starts to get its the rights as a human being. Like Roe v. Wade did a pretty good job at like navigating those kind of murky waters. It was decent decision at the time. And the tweaks that they made to it later, to where it was no longer based around the trimesters, but it was based around viability of the fetus. Like they were good common sense, sort of like, okay, there's no good answer to what to do about abortion, but this is sort of a reasonable middle ground that we can come to on it. And it was good. It was good. And the Republicans took it away. They put Supreme Court justices on the court that didn't want it, and they took it away. And they got away with it because Democrats didn't get out to vote. Democrats, like, this liberal thought that like the good will always win in the end, sort of got shattered in that moment. And that's what happens with a lot of liberal thinkers, is like they think that they're on this trajectory towards, as close to perfection as the world can get. They believe we're not there yet, but they think that people move that direction just naturally. They just go towards the better place. When in reality, people don't go towards the better place. They go towards whatever they can be convinced is the better place. And if people are convinced that the way to get to the better place is to just let the system do its thing, which is what liberals preach, then they're not going to be energized. They're not going to have anything to go out to vote for. So minority control can happen, and it can happen really fast. And it's all about where the energy is. And the Roe v. Wade being overturned just sort of pumped the energy back into the liberal base. And people came out in droves for this. And it seemed to be in the polls that it was like dying off a little. That the fever over abortion was starting to die slowly. And it really didn't. It just wasn't being reflected in the polls, and people came out like crazy for it. So, that's what people came out to vote for. They came out to vote for college loan forgiveness. They voted against bad candidates on the Republican Party, and they voted against the overturning of Roe v. Wade. They wanted Roe v. Wade to stay in place. They want their abortion rights. But there's also a lot of stuff happening right now that makes life a little difficult for people. Inflation's pretty bad. Jobs are actually, unemployment's really low at the moment, but inflation's pretty bad. There's a lot of conflict between what's going on in Ukraine. There's a lot of conflict with like tax policy and stuff like that right now, and gas prices are really high, and the economy is like, it's sort of a mixed bag. Like, inflation's high, supply chains are still disrupted, but also unemployment is really low. So it's sort of like this weird thing going on. But we can all agree that for the average American, the economy is worse now than it was before. Pretty much all of the gains that COVID had allowed to happen from having a worker shortage, where labor became harder to get, so wages started to rise as companies competed to get people in. All those gains are basically wiped out at this point because of inflation. So it was widely considered that this fact that everything was more expensive, gas prices were up, grocery prices are up, car prices are up, everything of any base value to a normal American's life had increased in price significantly in the last year or so, a little longer. That was going to be the main driver to get people out to vote, and it was for the Republicans. The Republicans came out to vote for inflation because the Republican Party just drilled the Democrats constantly on inflation, just all the time. Inflation, 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 inflation. What they failed to do was convince the independents. Because the independents didn't see a solution coming from the Republican Party. The Republican Party was like, Democrats bad, inflation bad, vote for me. Okay, what the fuck are you going to do? And the answer that the Republicans had was, just they bad, them bad, me good. And it was like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And the answer is, Obama actually had a really good line. Their answer is tax cuts. The answer is, we're going to cut taxes. Who are you going to cut taxes for? We're going to cut taxes for the wealthy. Why are you going to cut taxes for the wealthy? Because if we cut taxes for normal people, it has an outsized impact on the amounts of fucking spending that happens. And then when spending goes up because you cut the taxes on because when you cut taxes on normal people and spending goes up, inflation gets worse. Like this is the game that we all play. This is what Republicans do. They cut taxes all the time, and then by extension they increase spending because they cut taxes. And they know that if they cut taxes for rich people, that's just money that's going to go in a bank account. It's going to sit there. It's going to get reinvested back into the stock market. So they can cut taxes for rich people all damn day, and it won't really affect inflation all that much. And they know this. They know that they can do it. And so when they scream cut taxes, what they're actually doing is cutting taxes for the wealthy people, the people who having an extra couple $1,000s in their bank account every year won't actually affect the inflation rates. But here's the trick. Inflation rates only go up when they cut taxes for the poor people because the fucking companies, the large corporations that run everything, they know you have an extra couple $1,000s because your taxes were cut. So they raise their prices so they can get that money. That's how it works. That's why most of our inflation is happening right now. So they don't have a solution to that. The Republicans don't have a solution to companies going like, oh, people got some extra money. Oh gosh, I better raise the price of bananas. They don't have to raise the price of bananas. I mean, just keeping profit margins stable, the price of bananas is going to go up with all the supply chain disruptions that are happening in the world right now. But it's not going to go up as much as it has. Gas doesn't have to go up like 100. What was it? It was like $2.50 in Ohio coming into 2021, and then it just go boom right through the fucking roof. Like, production didn't even stop that much. Like, when you look at the actual numbers, like the production of oil, excuse me, the production of oil didn't actually go down that much. It's just rich people trying to scrape more money out of people who finally have a little bit of cash to spend. That's all it is. Not all of it, but most of it. So, like, Republicans don't have a solution to that. They don't. You know, Democrats at least have tried with the Inflation Reduction Act to like start to sort of like engineer the markets in a way where stuff like that becomes more difficult. Where we're taking the excuse of inflation and taking the fact that people have a little bit more money in their pocket and using it to boost your own profits as a company becomes harder to do. The Republicans have no solution to that, and the the independents saw right through it. And so they did not come out to vote because of inflation, because they're like, well, you're not any fucking better. Like, yeah, the Democrats aren't particularly knocking it out of the park here, but at least they passed something. Excuse me. The Democrats at least passed a plan. They at least passed something to help people. Yeah, it might not be enough, but you ain't done shit. And I think that didn't get past the independents. Nowhere near enough for the Republicans to like have the giant wave that they needed. And that's the crux of it, is Republicans failed to make an argument for why you should vote for them. All they did was make an argument for why you shouldn't vote for Democrats. But Democrats, on the other hand, made a reasonable argument for why you should vote for Democrats. Did it involve the economy? Almost certainly not. They basically didn't run on the economy at all, which, they could have done more. But from a tactic standpoint, yeah, if the economy's garbage when you're going into an election, don't fucking run on the economy. So, I don't necessarily hold that against the Democrats. But what they did say was, come out to vote for us. We will protect your abortion rights. We will stop these crazy Trump Republicans from trying to take away our democracy. We will help you with your student loans. We will help you get a job. Look at all the jobs that are in the United States right now. And look at all the ones that are coming in from the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, they went and hit all of this stuff home. They avoided the election or the economy, but they hit on all of that other stuff. And it gave people a thing to come out and vote for. And the Republicans failed to do that. And I think that's why they got wrecked. Well, relatively speaking. The Republicans they'll probably control the House. They lost a seat in the Senate, more than likely. But the fact that this is even a conversation at this point, that the Democrats may have a chance to hold on to the House, shows how poorly the Republicans did, because just the normal headwinds should have pushed the Republicans easily into controlling the House, probably the Senate, and it just didn't happen for them. So the side effect of this, which is very important, is that we have staved off potentially the beginning of the end of the democracy that we know. The Democrats are not lying when they say that democracy is on the ballot this time, and abortion is abortion being Roe v. Wade being overturned is bad. The candidate quality that they had is bad. The college loan forgiveness is good. Getting some of the jobs to come to the United States in the Inflation Reduction Act is also good. But if we're being honest, none of that stuff matters in the long run if you cannot wrestle control away from the people who would knock down the institutional barriers that keep our democracy functioning. And it seems to be at the moment that we have staved that off for another 2 years. The judiciary is still heavily Republican and heavily leaning towards just letting the Republicans do whatever they want. So it's perfectly reasonable to assume that just because the legislature is either going to be deadlocked or leaning Democrat, that the judiciary may rule that certain voting laws coming from the federal government are illegal. They may overturn, your ability to sue cops for doing bad things. All this stuff is up for grabs with a Republican judiciary, and we basically have no ability to do anything about it because these judges are appointed for life. So it's we'll see, but it's perfectly reasonable to be afraid that, despite the fact that this election went well for Democrats, and despite the fact that Democrats do seem to actually be concerned about preserving the institutions that keep our democracy running, it may be too late, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting, because we're not at the point where we can't turn this thing around yet. It's just we need to be extremely aware of the threat of a party only concerned with gaining power. We need to be concerned with that threat, that a party exists in the United States, mainly the Republicans, who are only concerned with gaining power. They don't care how they have to do it. They don't care who they have to go through to get it. And they don't care what lackey they have to use to get there. As evidenced by how quickly they dropped Trump by this. Trump built the momentum behind the Republican Party right now. It wasn't Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is very effective at getting judges on the bench. But other than that, that dude ain't done shit. And he's been the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate for how long? Like, Trump shows up and just makes all those guys look absolutely lost at figuring out how to connect with voters. But despite that, Trump, the loose cannon that he is, got way too stupid, way too quick, and actually ended up hurting the Republicans in the long term. And once DeSantis had his big rise moment, they were like, see you later, Trump. Deuces. And as a result, we have to be careful, because that party they do not care. The people in that party are only concerned with getting power. They're only concerned with getting money. They're only concerned with living a nice, cushy lifestyle while fucking the rest of us. So, cross your fingers. Despite the fact that we have staved it off for the moment, we still might be in for a wild ride.